the slides. Topic of this, overview of the class, and then talking about what exists in information technology in the healthcare industry. First, I'd like to start with a quick intro of who you all are. So I'm going to post a Google form in the chat. You should see it right now. I just want to get a sense of your name, any experience that you've had, prior experience with coding, none's required, and then what you hope to get out of this class. Okay, so I'll give you like 3 minutes to take care of that. Okay, so I think we got a lot of answers, not everyone, but that's okay. Take your time, but just want to go over a few. So some people are looking sort of for the basic overview of how we integrate information technology in a healthcare delivery. We're going to really dive into that actually in this lecture. I'm going to give an overview of how this integrates to the different aspects of healthcare, patients, providers, payers, as well as producers. Some really wanted to understand how to code. Whether that's because they wanted to see, is coding something that they'd like to pursue as a future career path, or just to see, you know, how this really fits in. I think my goal here, I think this provides a great start so that you're not intimidated by the coding aspect of how you go from what's on a code editor to getting that onto a website on the screen. So that if you feel later on in your career, hey, there should be an app for this, right? Or I wish that there was a simpler way to automate what I'm currently doing that's tedious, that you at least know where to start, right? Maybe you wouldn't be the person coding, but you would be able to converse with the people who would be coding. I will say that there's been a few students in the past, really this is the third year teaching this, who have decided to pursue coding full-time. So there's a great range of possibilities from just understanding how IT and the healthcare industry interact with each other to really becoming a full-time coder yourself. So I really look forward to working with you all on this. Based on some of the feedback that I've gotten from this response, it looks like this will be a good fit for a lot of you. And then I will also try to keep my curriculum a little bit flexible so that if I see certain aspects and what you all tell me you really want to pursue sticking out, then I can dive a little bit deeper into them. So Mary, I know you brought up medical device engineering and studying human factors. We can definitely focus a little bit on that. We could even make that a part of your final prototype project, right? Something that's really specifically tied to what a human interface on a medical device would look like from a prototype perspective.
You have all 5 of the new cohort, the MDE cohort in your class.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that might make a good team, right? The 5 of you. Okay, let me just admit someone else. All right, so moving forward, I'd like to start with a little soundbite from Bill and Melinda Gates, and they're talking a little bit about health IT and how they see the future of that developing.
But Bill and I often have this kind of fun debate, like we have a fun debate about, well, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would you live? We also have the fun debate of, if you were entering any field now, you had your choice of going into any field, what field would you go in? And he and I both would go into the cross between biology and computer science. Huh. What is going to happen in those fields? We're only beginning.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, because what you can do with computational models to...
I can't do very much with them at all.
Okay. To see spread of disease around the world, but people don't even realize that we're taking the data off their phones. So we're seeing, if you're in Africa, we're seeing if you're a worker, how often you're leaving Nairobi to go out and work on a field. And maybe you're, or in a forest, actually in the case of malaria, people go work in a forest somewhere. We couldn't figure out why the malaria kept coming back in the village after we eliminated it. Well, there's a forest kind of malaria. So now we can do modeling of the mosquitoes and how they move around, what distance they go. We can look at GPS data to see how people are moving around, and then you can apply very specific tools, bed nets in a certain area, malaria medicines in a certain area, eventually, hopefully a vaccine, eventually you'll be able to release mosquitoes, genetically modified mosquitoes. So just what we can do with that, that's just mathematically modeling. We haven't even done the machine learning piece on that yet. And then you cross that with the biology of what we're learning about the human body.
So this really, I think, it is an indicator of how big this this aspect of the healthcare industry is poised to be. You know, another thing that I might bring up that she doesn't really mention is she talks a lot about the fancy part of let's model where mosquitoes are going so that we can really deploy resources to the problem areas. But the user interface is almost as important, if not more important, than all of the modeling and the machine learning that you do. You need to have something that's easy to use, right? Easy to adopt for the average person who's walking around with their cell phone. This might be something that some of you have noticed in looking at medical devices is the user interface does not look like something that Apple created. It looks like something from the 90s, right? And so are there opportunities to improve these user interfaces so that we can also reduce errors that could be costly and even endangering patients' lives? So that's a lot of what I want to focus on is really that front end user experience. We'll do a little bit of work on algorithms too, but it's really being comfortable with that basic HTML, CSS code, and then a little bit of JavaScript so that you can make a nice looking interface for people to use in their day-to-day in the healthcare industry. Okay, so just a few notes about that, right? Getting data. We're walking around with computers, I'm sure you've heard this before, in our pockets. And so how can we leverage some of the data that is possible to create better outcomes for patients? Okay, a little bit to put some numbers behind this. You can see that we have what looks like exponential growth and investment within health IT to the point where now the past 2 years, we're really doubled from the 2 years prior to that, where we're getting about almost $15 billion in investment. And actually, this last number is just the first half of 2021. So I don't have the full numbers from last year available yet, but you can see that this graph is continuing to grow exponentially. So a lot of money is pouring into this area because a lot of people are realizing really how big this could potentially be. a lot of the focuses right now, the big areas that are making up this investment are telehealth. You know, raise your hand if you've had an experience with telehealth since COVID. I know I have. And then, you know, keep your hand up if you enjoyed that experience. You know, I would say probably one of the better doctor visits that I had was a telehealth visit. It only took 10 minutes, and you know, the worries that I had, the doctor was able to work through, and I didn't have to sit in the waiting room, you know, forever and worry about getting COVID. So that looks like it's here to stay. I know a lot of the policy changes that made telehealth easy, now that that can of worms has been opened, it really can't be shoved back in. So, you know, a lot of what was keeping that from thriving was people protecting, you know, incumbents, right? And so cat's out of the bag there. And so that's an experience that a lot of people have been able to have since COVID. That's sort of a silver lining, right? Mobile is another area. So since we have these computers in our pockets, how can we use them to drive healthy behaviors? And we'll get into that a little bit later. And then, of course, information management. So information has increased by probably 1,000-fold in the last decade in terms of all the data points I have, right? How many steps someone's taking. We have, if you have a pacemaker, all that information is now in the cloud ready for someone to do something with it, right? Genetic sequencing, we have all this genetic data, but there's a need to figure out, well, what the heck can I do with this now that I've got it? Electronic health records, another good example of, I now know everything about a patient visit, but in reality, not a lot is being done with that. So you'll actually, a lot of the hospitals in LA, Cedars-Sinai, UCLA, they're now starting incubators where people who have an idea of, hey, I could use code to try to, you know, just as an example, help a patient see the progression of their cholesterol over time and drive good behaviors to lower that. These hospitals will now take those people in and say, hey, we would love you to just figure out a way to integrate with our health records so that you could build your app or whatever that might be and help us make sense of all this data that we now have. So it's almost like we have an embarrassment of riches now with health data, and it's really up to the people in the digital health world to start to make sense of it. Any questions? So here's what you're going to learn in this class. It's really, first and foremost, how the healthcare industry is using IT. We're going to dive deep into that in this, this class today. And then how can you create IT solutions? So I have this structured as really a pyramid, right? Where at the base, we're brainstorming health IT solutions. So it's everything works, right? Let's just get it all out on the paper. And then number two, we start to create a mock-up. So we zero in on a specific idea, but still the possibilities are endless. We're just doing a mock-up. And then we start to get specific, right? So we start to code the most important features within that. Has anyone heard of an MVP in startup speak? Anyone? Minimum viable product. So we actually have a reading after this class for next lecture where we'll talk about what that is, which is basically what is the minimum amount of work that you need to do to prove a concept with your digital tool. And the idea is, let's not try to build the perfect product right away. Let's try to build the minimum product. Maybe we're even a little bit embarrassed to release it so that we can get it into the wild where users can use it. And they can tell us, hey, you know what, actually, you need something that can help me out with this feature or that feature or the other. Oftentimes, no matter how smart we are, we can't guess what our digital feature, our digital product will become. We really have to get that to users and have them tell us. Okay, so here's the syllabus. In this lecture, we're going to talk about where digital health is used within the scope of patients, providers, payers, and producers. I'm also going to get you ramped up on how to use Code Academy. So Code Academy is going to be your main homework in terms of learning how to code. So it's a pretty cool interface where you're able to, as you learn the lessons of coding, you're able to code your little tiny scripts to maybe make a form that someone can enter information into. And so that will help you with your initial learning of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then I will supplement that in the second half of lectures with, sort of in-class coding. So we'll code together. I'll show you how you can code to create certain features that might be useful for your projects. And I'll also be open to any questions you all have. So if you're struggling to create a certain feature with your prototype, we can go through examples of how one might create that during class. Okay. After that first lecture, we're going to talk about user stories and wireframes. So this is really that first step of how do you get an idea for a useful digital application? And then how do you start to mock that up? So we'll learn how to do that using something called Balsamiq, which is linked up to the Google Drive. It's sort of like PowerPoint, imagine, but geared specifically towards developing digital tools. And then in the third lecture, we're going to have an early midterm. And really, it's just a project. It's not an actual test. And that's creating your own mockup using Balsamiq. So it's a little bit early in the class. I actually moved it up a week compared to last year. The reason I did that is because I think it's important to get started on the actual coding project as soon as we can. So the expectation in terms of what you do with your wireframe is really just, do you have an idea that has a certain amount of features? It's not too difficult of a project, but it's going to get you an extra week now to work on the big project, which involves the code itself. We're also going to talk about agile methodology. And this sort of goes back to, let's say you don't, after this class, decide that you want to code, but you would like to be conversant with someone who does know how to code. That way, if you've got a problem that you want to solve, you're able to help them do that for you. Agile methodology is going to be a very important tool in that tool belt, because it's really is going to demonstrate to you how coders work on a week-by-week basis, and it'll help you understand how you can drive operational success for any coders that you might be working with in your career. In the fourth lecture, we're going to really start to get into code. So we're going to use something called GitHub in order to build our digital health apps. The nice thing about GitHub is that this is really, the hub, so to speak, for developers of all levels of experience. So newbies, like we're going to be in this class, use GitHub, as well as the most advanced coders in the world will use GitHub to build their tools. Mary, I see you raise your hand. Is there a question?
Yeah, now I actually have two questions. One,
Okay.
my question is, for the HTML, are you gonna like when we get into the website, are you gonna show us how, like in Chrome, you can go and adjust it through the web browser itself?
Yes, yeah, that is something that I've shown in previous classes. So I'll definitely make sure that we cover that as well in this one. There's something really cool in Chrome where you can basically open what's called a developer console, and you can see the code that has gone behind any website, right? You can do websites like Facebook, they mask it a little bit, so it's a little bit more difficult to see. But for 90% of websites out there, if you open this developer console, you could change the color of their title from like blue to red. And so that can be a cool way to see how that works. Obviously, you're not changing it for other people. You're just changing it within your own browser. So, you're not hacking or anything, but it's a nice way to see how changes in code can impact the look of a site. There's another question, Mary?
Yeah, about GitHub, is there an account for the class to link? So if we have problems with the code, you could just go into that shared file?
Absolutely. So we'll get to that in the fourth lecture. Maybe even we'll do it in the third, because there's sometimes are logistical issues with setting up GitHub accounts based on what someone's got on their computer, how old it is, and all that. So I'll make sure that I'm there for you to sort of walk through that process with anyone who has trouble. Once you get through that though, you'll find that the coding part and the pushing the code live is pretty straightforward. Okay. Any other questions from anyone else? All right. So we will keep moving. Second half of the syllabus, we're going to really start to get into code. So introduction to coding. We're also going to, in the non-coding part of the lecture, we're going to talk about FDA requirements around usability testing. I can definitely amplify that a little bit for those who are focused on that in their outside curriculum. So I'll make sure that we really cover what is important within a user interface on a medical device, and what are the different tricks of the trade that we can use in web development to prevent some of those issues. After that, we'll start talking about how to make your site dynamic. So up to this point, late April, you should actually have a web page up and running. It might be super basic, right? It might not look much more than a PowerPoint looks. And then we'll start to talk about, okay, now how can we put functionality into this, right? Some things that people have done in the past is you can enter different symptoms of your health, and then it will give you like a very fundamental diagnosis. Let's say my heart rate is this, my blood pressure is that, and it'll tell you, what some of your likely problems might be in terms of diseases. We've had some websites that have been able to help people get social connections based on their diseases or whatever they might be looking for. So a lot of cool stuff we can do once we start to learn how to code on this side. And then we'll do final pitches. So there won't be a final exam for this class. It'll just be a final pitch. And then you'll be graded on that final pitch. But then you'll also have through the end of finals to finalize, maybe based on some of that feedback, your code package. Okay. So strictly project-based course. And really it's two projects. There's the group project where you're building an actual web prototype with coding. And then there's the individual project where you're building your mockup. Here's the grading breakdown. So 25% class group participation. So every week I'm taking notes on who's participating. And once we get into the group projects, who's really driving some of those group discussions. And I'm grading the participation on a curve. So, if you're an A, you're an A, you can't get an A plus. So, don't worry about having to, have way more contributions than anyone else. Just try to be in that upper echelon in terms of participation. If you're shy or if you don't really like to participate in a Zoom setting, which I totally understand, it is kind of weird. You're welcome to offer participations through the chat window. And if you don't want to do it during lecture, I will take thoughtful emails as participation as well. Right. So not the, hey, how do I upload this into Canvas, but actual questions about digital health. I will count that as participation. So many different ways in which you can reach out to me to get those participation points. I would say if you're aiming for an A, with the class this size, I would say try to aim for a little under one contribution per lecture. Obviously in your groups, you should be contributing a lot more than that. But in terms of the lecture portions, try to have something to say each lecture. But there are 25 of us, or 26 actually. So that might not be feasible every single lecture. So don't worry if you didn't say anything on a given lecture. Just try to get back on the next one. Okay. 25% is going to go towards your mock-up presentation using Balsamiq. And then 35% will be the final prototype. This actually says presentation, but it's the presentation and the package. And then another 15% will be the student contribution. Any questions about grading? This is the general format. Of course, it will vary from lecture to lecture, depending on the content that we're working on, but like to start with a little bit of lecture, then have a break, and then on the second half, it'll be either teamwork or something where it's a little bit more interactive with the whole team or the whole class, I should say. So a little bit about the group project. There's going to be three major components. There's your front end component, which will be HTML and CSS. That can actually be broken up between the HTML and the CSS. When we talk about HTML, we're talking a little bit more about content, right? So it's with our website, what are we trying to tell the user, the visitor of the website? And then, in words. CSS is a little bit more of the look, right? So do we have a color scheme that we're using? Do we have a brand for our website to make it look nice? How will that work design-wise? And that's the CSS component of it. And then there's the back end, and we're really going to hear focus on JavaScript. This is probably, I don't want to say the most difficult, but this is the one where I would say not everybody in the class gets it. So don't feel bad if JavaScript is just sort of beyond you, because there's other things that you can focus on if JavaScript is not your bag, right? Instead of that, you could focus a little bit more on the HTML and CSS front end stuff, or on the more of the project management, quality assurance, and marketing. So when we talk about that, we're really focusing deep onto the user testing. So this is a bigger class than we usually do. So I think you're going to have the people power within these groups to really put a lot of effort into the user testing. So I'm going to emphasize this more than I have in previous years. So if the coding is just, you want to be familiar with it, but you can't really get your head around it yourself, then I think this last category of the project management, QA, marketing will be very helpful for you. And it'll still enable you at the end of the class to walk away with an understanding of how will you interact with people on the web development side in your future career. Okay. Any questions about how that will be broken down? And then we'll have direct assignments on the teams of who's covering what, and that will feed in to the individual part of the grade. So I'll sort of know who's responsible for what part of it, because sometimes we'll see a site that is beautiful, but then doesn't really work that well on the JavaScript side. And so I can sort of skew a little bit of how I'm grading based on what I see there and who's been assigned to what side of the project. So don't worry too much if you feel like a certain part of your project is weak, but definitely try to work as a team to try to prop up anyone who might be slipping behind a little bit. Okay. Any questions about that? We'll look for content like headers, text, images, basic stuff, buttons. And I want the buttons to actually do something, right? So if you click a button, it should either take you to a different page within your website or maybe do something, calculate based on inputs, maybe a diagnosis or some other sort of thing that you're coming up with through your JavaScript algorithm. I want to go from inputs. So a user is inputting something into the website to outputs. So based on those inputs, you are showing the user something cool, whether that might be a profile that they've created, again, a diagnosis based on their symptoms, anything along those lines works. And then I like to see data visuals. So not just words that come out, right? Based on, I put my profile information and you tell me, hey, your name is Will, right? That's not really that helpful. I'd rather it look interesting, right? Because again, what we're trying to do is move past what we see in some of these medical devices where it looks like sort of an MS-DOS all text interface from the 90s to something that, Apple would be proud to put out or Android would be proud to put out. Right. So we'll try to make something that looks nice and catches the eye, because ultimately this is all about adoption and mistake proofing. And the only way to do that is through sort of a beautiful simplicity that can get a user to want to use your prototype. All right, brief overview of the history of health IT. And I'm going to talk about this in two different periods within the last really 60 years. So back in the 60s, this created what is called the first health IT explosion And there were really four categories of inputs, let's call them, that created this outcome of an explosion in health IT. The first is costs. And what we were finding is that costs were really ballooning in healthcare. And a lot of that was based on this fee for a service model. So a lot of people, they saw the town doctor as really could do no wrong. Whatever they say is what matters. And there was no real oversight into what they were doing. So because of that, some doctors were doing a great job, but others were taking advantage of this to just do a lot of stuff, but not necessarily things that improve health outcomes. And they were still getting paid the same, no matter what the outcomes were. So there was a need to try to rectify this. At the same time, we had the Civil Rights Act, as well as Medicare, that led to far more patients being treated, which is, of course, a great thing, right? More people are getting treated, but that created more demand on the system. So there was a need to figure out how can we address that demand. And that really led as an impetus for health IT to try to help do that. Also the space race, which may not seem directly related to health IT, but what that did is that led to a lot more funding into the STEMs, right? So our sciences, science, tech, engineering. And so because of that, not only was there more money to lead to these innovations in health IT, but there was also more inspiration, right? There's a little bit of magic in the air because of the space race, where everybody wanted to be a scientist, or at least more people than had wanted to do that before. And so that really helped with the spurring innovation within health IT. And then finally, computers. So there's a technological component, and computers really enabled this explosion, because all of a sudden you have these things that can remember what has happened with a given patient visit, and then use that to determine what we're going to do next. How can we handle this patient better? Where do the costs go? Who pays what based on what outcome? And that also was a big contributor to this explosion in health IT innovation. The next slide I'm going to show is a parallel within the 2000s. So starting in the last 20 years. Can anyone think of what some of the parallels are to these four inputs that led to health IT explosion that might be leading to this current explosion? Any thoughts? There's no wrong answers here. Just want to sort of see that you guys are thinking about how this might be applicable today. Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
They're all related to helping various different end users.
Yeah.
The information obtained from that, especially in terms of an IT perspective, it all leads into, they all contributed to what we have for GUIs and expanded the user experience for a lot of different tech that we have.
Yeah, that's great. So really focusing on the users and patient outcomes. And that's definitely been something that we've been talking about lately when we talk about personalized medicine, right? So you can't treat every patient the same. In order to do that, we need some level of improved health information technology. So that's great. Leilani.
One of my guesses could be our kind of like how we moved into like data science and how we store data science and like data throughout the years have probably exploded, like, I don't know, but anything like that in the healthcare system.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I would compare that to this computers part, right? So computers were a technological innovation that led to the explosion in the 60s. Now I think data is a really good way to put that. Is now we have all of this data that as a technology is enabling improvements in health IT. Okay, Tyler.
I think along those same lines, cloud-based computing is blowing up, along with like you had with the Bill Gates and litigates Soundbite AI and machine learning in my space for regulatory. I know that's becoming a really, really big thing in regard to the data required for regulatory. So I guess it's like more of like the tech right now is starting to evolve and everybody's sort of adopting that.
Yeah, for sure. It used to be that you had to have a big room or even a dedicated floor in your company's building to handle all of these records, but now it's all in the cloud, and that enables us to have data maybe from 100 different hospital systems all in one place for regulators to take advantage of and help improve outcomes. So I think that's definitely a big part of that as well. Pablo.
I think another thing with computers is the approach on how to like better understand the genome and just like coding what hasn't been discovered yet, and just kind of finding like diseases that no one knows about, or how to better treat like specific patients.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that kind of touches upon our yellow category and our red one, right? Where it's not only technology, but also there's sort of a fervor around genetic engineering where like everyone's talking about it when we talk about CRISPR, and it's really become almost like a cocktail conversation now. And so, to be able to say that you're working in that is really something you can be proud of. And so that also helps with the input of actual talent that is going into the field. How about on the left side? Any parallels to what we are seeing now with maybe costs or coverage? Any major changes in coverage over the last 10 years? Go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah, so I think with the explosion of IT in the healthcare space came with the conversion of value-based care.
Yep.
And so, like you said, because of increasing costs, a lot of people in the space want to decrease costs and want to improve patient outcomes quality-wise.
Yeah, that's a great one. And that's truly a bipartisan thing, right? Is everybody understands like, yeah, we would love to pay for value instead of paying just for services. But the hard part is, well, how do we know when value has been delivered? And so that's going to be the role of health IT, to try to make it much easier to really know when that value has been delivered that can now be paid for. So there's a big need for that, right? It's sort of, we all agree we need to do it, but doing it is actually kind of hard. It's a lot easier to say, hey, you worked for an hour or you performed this test, therefore you're going to get paid X amount. And that has sort of historically led to overspending or unnecessary testing. So moving over to value-based care would be huge in terms of patient outcomes. Jeanette?
I think also the passing of Obamacare really expanded access for lots of people to insurance. So then now there's the move within IT to manage that great influx of patients that previously weren't covered before and weren't in the system, and how to integrate them now and like current times too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good parallel to what happened with coverage expansion from the Civil Rights Act and Medicare. It's now we have Obamacare that has led to a much more coverage, but then also more demand on the system. So how can we work with that to try to serve those patients better? All right, so let's see what I put. We have healthcare spending approaching about 15% of total GDP. And a lot of that is a function of not doing value-based care. So moving towards that, having better systems to do that could really help. Affordable Care Act, of course, we just talked about that. The internet, right? So we had the comment about cloud-based computing. And the internet has really been a big driver behind that. Not only is it now cool to work in genetics, but it's also cool to work on the internet, right? And be a startup, be a developer. There's sort of a mystique around that, and something that people can be really proud of nowadays. And so that's leading to an influx of talent of people trying to solve some of these health IT problems that we've got. And then we've also got electronic health records, mobile, have exponentially increased the amount of data that is available to be processed and analyzed through health IT. Okay, so I'm going to go through the healthcare ecosystem, and I'm basically going to talk about patients, providers, payers, producers, and then categories within those of where is health IT being used to serve these different constituents. We'll do patients, which is the biggest one. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll tackle providers, payers, and producers. Okay. Before I get into this, any questions? All right, great. So patients, the first category I'm going to talk about is social support. So this might be apps for messaging, for healthcare related things, elderly care, crowdfunding. Also, one of the biggest ones would be online communities. So communities for patients, communities for doctors. You know, that there's any number of, hey, we are Facebook for doctors or Facebook for cancer patients, that sort of thing. And that really enables these patients or healthcare providers to interact with each other, share best practices, and just have a little bit of peace of mind and knowing that they're working and know other people like them. So speaking of that, Patients Like Me is a great example of a social network that is dedicated specifically for patients. So I'm going to use this, I call this the technology storyboard throughout this lecture to talk about really what is the core element of this health IT business idea, whatever you want to call it, application. And then we are going to use this in the next lecture to try to come up with our own ideas. So pay attention to how this works. So we have Patients Like Me. The big problem that it's solving is that patients are too often on their own with their patient journeys. This is really used for patients. And then there's certain inputs, right? A patient will input their personal profile, maybe some symptom updates. And then the outputs that Patients Like Me is providing for these users is a sense of community, right? Because when everybody's putting in their profile, now you can have a community of, hey, here's a patient that looks like me, that's been through the same experiences as me, maybe lives in the same area as me, and I can now connect with them. Based on the symptom updates, they can also provide convenient health tracking. And that's something that's become a core part of their service to patients. So a storyboard, let's set the scene. First, a patient is diagnosed and they feel alone. They feel like there's nobody in their friend group who are like them. They don't know what to do. So next thing they do, what happens next is they will join a community for their disease on Patients Like Me. Then what? Well, then they make friends, they learn about treatments, and they track their health progression. And what is the outcome? It's that they feel less alone and they feel more educated about how to deal with disease. So any questions about this format? See how it works? We sort of have a problem that's being solved. We have a user who is interacting with this application that is providing inputs. And the application is doing something with those inputs to provide useful outputs for that patient. And then the storyboard is just sort of, what does that process look like? How does that lead to a better outcome? All right, next category, disease management. So we're actually starting to see the development of digital therapeutics, which is really kind of cool. So you can imagine this is more in the mental health, elderly care, things like that, addiction, where it's how can we use what an app can provide to improve patient outcomes. And we've seen the FDA approve actually the app that I'm going to talk about in the next slide as an actual therapy that can be diagnosed, reimbursed by insurance and all of that. We've also probably seen and maybe even used apps that have been developed to help us for a given condition. Telehealth, we talked about that at the beginning of the lecture. That's really exploding in popularity. And then drug adherence is another thing I'd like to highlight where, you know, we often think that just developing the wonder drug is the solution to healthcare. And I know I've been in that trap of thinking that way in the past, but it's really not the development of the therapy that matters, although that does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as actually getting that therapy to the patient and making sure that they are able to use that therapy to improve their outcomes. So adherence is a big thing that health IT is trying to tackle within the patient world. So here is the digital therapeutic that I wanted to cover. It's called Reset. The problem that it's solving is that addiction treatment really needs to be constant. It's not just about, telling someone who's an addict what they need to do, maybe giving them a pill to help them with their treatment. It's about that constant coaching and that constant, helping them stay on it, helping them fight that addiction and stay on that path to recovery. So an input might be attributes of a given user's addiction, as well as in real time when they have cravings. That's a big function of this app, is they can tell it, hey, I'm having a craving right now. And then that app will use cognitive behavioral therapy to help coach them through that craving. So it's almost like they have their own mentor or sponsor through that process. And then also as an output, they have data that can go directly to that patient's clinician. So that the clinician, rather than doing whatever they do during their session and then hoping for the best over the next 3, 6, who knows how many months, they're understanding what's going on with their patient in real time, and they're intervening when they need to. So setting the scene, a patient begins their addiction treatment. They then create their profile and they start to track their cravings. After that, a clinician will track recovery progress in real time, and they will adjust their treatment program as they need. And then the outcome is an increased chance of recovery due to more hands-on and constant therapy. And again, this was something that was submitted to the FDA based on differences that they saw of people who were using the Reset app. Internet of Things, I'm sure you've heard all about this, whether you have a Nest thermostat or smart fridge, something like that. A wearable, right? A Fitbit have really become all the rage, although Fitbit, I guess they sort of had their time a few years back. But wearables are really now starting to get implemented in actual healthcare applications. So here I'll talk about an application called Health to Sync. Problem that it's solving is that managing diabetes is not easy. It's a constant struggle. So the inputs that this has is it will actually connect to your glucose monitor, and it will measure the glucose levels in real time. It will also enable you to input any activities you do, as well as meals. And it even allows you to hook up with partners. So if you've got someone who you want to help motivate you, you can connect with them through this app. So once you do that, right, you find partners, friends that you have, you input the activities and meals, and you connect it to your monitor, it can now start to give you advice based on some of the latest and greatest clinical standards of what you can do to control your glucose levels. It will also, similar to the Reset app, it will communicate your progress or lack thereof with your clinician so that they can intervene if they need to. And they can just get a better idea when you actually visit them what's needed, right? They might see, hey, you're eating really healthy and your glucose is still really high. We might need to talk about rejiggering what you're using to control your glucose. Storyboard, a patient has diabetes and they need to start managing it better. So this is really the user that we're looking at here. Once they connect their glucose monitor and their Fitbit, they can now track their data within the app. So after that, partners and clinicians can now use that data to encourage patient, as well as change their therapy course if they need to. And then the desired outcome is increased behaviors that can mitigate diabetes. Information. This is something that we've talked about a lot in this lecture alone, of we've got all this information out there. How can we make sense of it and make it easy to use? And not only in terms of portals for WebMD, which we'll talk about in the next slide, but also maybe games that can help us learn in a more fun way, as well as better ways to find the right doctor or the right insurance for your needs. So WebMD, I'll cover. I'm sure most of you know about that, right? You end up inputting your symptoms, and then you'll inevitably end up focusing on the worst possible diagnosis. But it is still also very useful for understanding what might be going on based on your symptoms that you're experiencing. So the problem that it's solving is that reliable health information is hard to find. This is really unfortunate because I find that a lot of people now have misinformation when they'll say things like, "Oh, if I, eat red apples, that's gonna improve my who knows what, right? My longevity, my ability to have kids, something like that." There's a lot of misinformation out there, and having some of these curated sites like WebMD, Mayo Clinic also has a good version of this, is really helpful for helping patients get what they need. Data inputs are your symptoms as well as demographic info. And then the outputs are potential diseases that you might have, as well as next steps. So storyboard, a patient feels symptoms, but they're not really sure what's going on. After that, they enter the symptoms into the symptom checker, and then they receive the most likely diagnoses based on those symptoms that they just entered. Desired outcome is that they are given treatment options as well as questions that they can ask their physician. So now they're going into a doctor's visit with more information, they're better informed, and they're better able to ask the right questions at the right time to, I'm sure, as their busy physician. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about data, and this is including patient data, right? Electronic health records, as well as some interesting things that are now happening on the blockchain and different EHR platforms. So I'll start with blockchain. There's a company called Emblema that is out there. And the problem that they're solving is that we input all of this information into electronic health records. Oh, go ahead. Was there a question? Okay. But we don't own our data. That's a big problem. I work a lot in the rare disease community, and it's a complaint that they sometimes have where sometimes they'll partner with a company that is saying, hey, we will enable you to put your information onto this platform for free, as long as we have control over the data. And they end up selling that data to different researchers or different pharma companies that need it. And sometimes that can leave the patients stuck because they didn't know that this company was now going to be a gatekeeper to other researchers that they want to work with their data to try to find new treatments. So with Emblema, the patients can actually own their own data. The inputs are their health records, as well as activity trackers so that they could track what's going on in real time. And then the outputs are compensation whenever that data is uploaded and securely shared with a given researcher. So that way, instead of paying a middle person, right, or one of these companies that's housing their data, the patients are actually directly getting paid individually. So you can imagine that they might upload their health records into Emblema, and then they're going to choose who they're willing to share with, right? Maybe only researchers, pharma companies, all of the above. And then they're compensated through tokens that are given to them through the blockchain. After that, these tokens provide access to healthcare services, and then patients are in control of their health data and then properly compensated, rather than it being one of these companies that's getting paid on their behalf. Okay, so I'd like you all to do some quick sleuthing. I'm going to paste this link into the chat and then create your own technology storyboard. So just do some Googling. I'll give you 5 minutes and then create a storyboard for patients. And you can use any of these categories.
Professor, can you clarify what you exactly want us to do? Some of us are a little confused.
Sure. So basically just fill out this form, find any sort of platform application that a patient might use. So similar to the examples that I provided in the class, maybe it's an area that you feel passionate about, a disease that you care about, and then just fill out that form. So essentially it's this, but in a Google form format. And then it'll be a good way for someone to participate by talking about what they did. So actually it might be helpful I see there's been a few submissions already. Would anyone like to volunteer what they submitted to talk about it?
I can go if that's okay.
Great, yeah.
So I was thinking something along the lines of a digital health app. I found one that works, I think, on Apple, maybe Android.
Okay.
And the
And what's it
purpose,
called?
My Therapy, I think it's called.
Okay,
My
great.
Therapy medication My Therapy medication reminder. The basis is that it'll track all the medication that you're taking, right? Who will use it will be the patients. The data input will be the medication that the patient's taking. Data outputs would be, I guess, suggestion when to take the medication and if it's safe to take with like overlapping medications.
And is this it? The one
Yeah.
that, okay,
It
cool.
would also like track what you're taking, how much you have left, any kind of like issues that you might have for specific kinds of medication based on like your health history. Let's see. So storyboard scene, setting the scene. So a patient who regularly takes a lot of medication but doesn't know how to keep track of the medication and when they're able to take them and if they should take it with food and whatnot. What would happen next is that the patient basically inputs all of the medication that they're taking along with the dosages and potentially like, like age, weight, and height. What happens next? The app creates a schedule that reminds the patient when to take the medication, the safest way to administer it, depending if they're taking like a long term, and if any medication like has any kind of adverse effects with each other. And then the desired outcome would basically be that the patient has a set schedule when to take the medication, set inventory, and just kind of like a reminder of when to take the medication. And they're able to keep track of their overall health.
Great. Yeah, this is a perfect example. So, my goal here is just to get you all to start looking for useful examples of digital IT in the real world. And then also get used to using this format in order to describe it, because in the next lecture, you'll be doing that for your own idea, right? And that'll also be something that will feed into your wireframe. So I want to start building that skill and how do you talk about a given health IT application. Okay. Would anyone else like to go? Maybe someone who hasn't had a chance to participate yet? We've got a good amount submitted now. How about Kavya?
Sure. So the app that I was looking at is, I think, called BPM Connect, and it's by the company Withings that has like a wireless blood pressure cuff. So so essentially, like this particular app, you use their blood pressure cuff, and then it automatically uploads whatever readings they have onto their app, and then that would be the input was just blood pressure readings, and then from the output it would be kind of usually just looking at trends from the blood pressure readings, and those can automatically be shared with the providers. So I said like patients and providers would be the users here, and using that information directly, doctors can just look at any information that the patient sends and then just make any adjustments to their medication regimen if needed.
Right. Yeah. And this is pretty much a medical device UI, right? I mean, it's the most sort of consumer focused version of that, right? This isn't a very fancy medical device at all. But this is trying to take something and make it look nice and make it easy to use for a given patient so that they could better share what's going on with their provider. Great, thanks so much. Okay, we can maybe do one more if anyone would like to share. How about Alec?
Yeah, so the one I looked at was for a digital health app. I believe it was for a cardiac care card. Essentially what it is it has sensors on like a credit card type of thing. You place your thumbs on these sensors and it's connected to a health app that will measure arrhythmia, also with heart irregularities, basically like an EKG app system. And it will let patients use it like on the go. So they don't have to schedule a doctor's appointment or go into the doctors constantly, especially for like patients with these arrhythmias, just to see if, if there's any problems with their heart. Yeah, it is that one.
Okay, great. Okay, then Jihao, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah. So I was looking at a website called ZocDoc, ZocDoc, and yeah. So it's basically if you're just inputting your condition and your location and time and even insurance. So um, I was actually having a hard time, for looking for a suitable physician, for certain conditions, and that applies that is a provider for my insurance plan. So, and yeah, it also provides you with some reviews from other users. So, yeah.
And we actually had some teams last year that created something that was similar to this, where they actually had a Google map embedded into their site, and they would, based on what someone chose, show them a different map. Now, you don't have to get, it's just sort of, so you don't get too worried about it. You don't have to actually fill in tons of data into a map and then have that work seamlessly with your prototype, but just having something where maybe one button brings up one map, another button brings up another map, I think can help you get the picture of how something like this might work from a web development side. But this is definitely well within the reach of what you could create. Okay, great. Is there anyone else who wants to go, or are we ready to move on? All right, going once, going twice. Providers. Okay, so one of the major areas, and I would say actually one of the most successful areas of health IT, it's a little bit boring and it's not necessarily that close to improving patient outcomes, but it's practice management. So how can we help doctors conduct their operations better and handle the logistics part of really running a business, which is what they're doing in a more efficient way? So the company that I'll highlight in this category is called Kairos. And the problem that they're trying to address is that patient appointments are inefficient. So this is a tool for providers. The inputs that they will take are practice information as well as appointment availability. And then the outputs are that they will actually help deliver interested patients to their provider users. And they also provide scheduling tools, reminders, analytics about who's coming in, when are you most busy, when might you need to staff up more based on the appointments that are being made. So the storyboard, setting the scene, a physician practice needs a better way to interact with their patients. So what happens when they start to use a platform, the physician inputs practice information onto their platform, the availabilities that they might have, and then patients come in and they find the practice and start to book appointments. Desired outcome for the providers is more patient throughput due to a better scheduling mechanism. Okay, and then Jihao, do you have a question still?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Yeah, no worries. Just want to make sure I wasn't missing it. Another category, one that we've talked about before, is telemedicine. So here we're talking about virtual care, sometimes patient apps that might not be the appointments themselves, but that help patients interact with their clinicians. We've talked about a few of those already. Digital therapies, as well as remote monitoring and drug adherence, which we've also talked about. So you'll notice that there's a little bit of overlap sometimes between what's useful for a provider and what's useful for a patient. And you'll see that likewise, maybe with payers as well as producers. So the app that I will highlight here is called SnapMD. And the problem that they're solving is that in-person medical attention really isn't always needed. So why don't we try to move some of this stuff into the digital realm? So the inputs that they will take are patient availability, physician availability, and medical data. And then their outputs are live interactions through the app, as well as analytics that can help improve patient consults. So setting the scene, a patient wants to, or a physician, sorry, wants to expand their telemedicine practice. So what they'll do is they'll create a profile of capabilities and availability on SnapMD, and then patients will schedule virtual appointments with that physician. The desired outcome is that these virtual appointments can lead to more throughput for the providers, as well as more efficient patient care, so that they're not coming into the office if they don't need to. One other thing I would just mention, so this isn't really relevant for your projects, but it's something to know when you get into telemedicine and really the interaction between a patient and a hospital, especially, there's a need sometimes to, second. Okay, sorry. There's a need sometimes to be holistic, right? So a lot of hospitals will require, hey, you need to not only be able to do the telemedicine, you also need to handle patient interactions, you need to handle adherence, you need to handle appointment makings, the whole enchilada. And the reason is because hospitals will go through a lot of effort to, they call it validate a given application that they're going to take on to make sure that it's going to work and it's not going to cause problems. And they don't want to have to do that with 50 different apps. So that they really look for those whole solutions when it comes to telemedicine. Third category for providers is specialty care. So here what we're talking about is helping personalize a patient experience within a given provider's practice, AI evaluation for triage, right? So trying to get the patient to the right provider at the right time, and then digital therapeutics. So what I'll talk about here is something called viz.ai. And the problem that they're addressing is that sometimes processing delays on medical reports can actually lead to patient deaths. So what they've got as an input is they'll take patient information as well as the data from brain scans and status updates. And then as an output, they will help with disease detection, and they'll also send alerts to help coordinate care team members. So that way you're not sort of, someone gets scanned, you don't have to wait for the radiologist or the pathologist to see something that they don't like, and then suddenly, 5-alarm fire, they try to contact anyone, some people are out to lunch, and everything's, uncoordinated, and the patient really might need to go into operation right away. And this helps sort all that and give the right people notifications right away, as soon as that test or that image is downloaded. So the storyboard is a neurosurgery department wants to improve patient flow. So what happens is a physician will upload brain scans into that platform, and the platform will detect any abnormalities using artificial intelligence and recommend next steps. So the desired outcome using this platform is that patients are given life-saving surgeries sooner and their survival is increased. Next category, decision support. So this helps with risk stratification. So helping really treat your most I shouldn't say important, but your most critical patients, right? The ones who need help right away, quickest, using predictive analytics to try to figure out what are going to be the best treatment courses for a given patient, helping with diagnostics, as well as using AI and big data to really, again, make sense of all this data that we have at our fingertips. So the app that I will highlight here is called OncoLens. And the problem that they're trying to solve is that cancer care coordination is poor. The inputs that they take are patient info, as well as care team info and tumor info. The outputs are that they will send organized updates to the team and suggest trials. So setting the scene, a care team forms for a new cancer patient. After that happens, tasks will be created for that care team, and then data will be uploaded into the platform. OncoLens will then provide clinical decision support, and coordination for that given patient. And then the result is that duplicate work is avoided and treatment progresses faster. So it helps with that coordination between, I mean, if you're a cancer patient, you're seeing probably 10 different physicians, surgeons, internal medicine, diagnosticians, all of that. And so helping them coordinate can really lead to better outcomes. Finally, information. So here we're talking about using real world evidence to help drive better outcomes, using e-learning tools to help train different providers, social networks among providers so that they can share best practices, as well as EHR platforms. So here I'll talk about something called GibLib. This is basically a YouTube for surgeons. And the problem that they're solving is that there is no centralized place for surgery videos. So the inputs are a bunch of surgery videos, as well as a little bit of VR sprinkled on top of that, and attributes of the surgeons who are users of the platform. The outputs so that they can actually provide training for those surgeons that can help them satisfy their continuing medical education. So the storyboard is that a surgeon might sign up for access to surgery training. They can then view curated training videos, and then the surgeon can earn continuing medical education credits in return for doing that. Desired outcome is that surgeons now have a centralized and curated location to train online. Okay, so let's do one more exercise with this, and then we'll go on a break. So you can use that same link. Just find a tool, anything online that you think pertains to using digital health to help providers do their thing. And you can use these categories as guidance. And then go ahead and create a storyboard for that. And then we can talk about some of the examples that you were able to find. And this might be a good one to start talking about, if you're a medical device person, some user interfaces using medical devices. Okay, so we'll take 5 minutes for that, then we'll present a couple, and then we'll go on a break. And if anyone has any questions about what needs to be done for this, feel free to send a chat or raise your hand. Happy to help. Okay, let's present a few. Julie, would you like to present on yours?
Yeah, so I chose Doximity, which is a professional medical network. It's a telehealth app that helps doctors video call their patients on any smartphone. And it's HIPAA secure, and it doesn't allow, or it doesn't require patients or doctors to have to download any extra apps or sign up for any extra software. And the app also allows for the doctors to use what they call a dialer tool, which allows for them to use sort of like a custom caller ID, which sort of allows the physicians to have this ID that can integrate with sort of a variety of things, such as the electronic health record apps that they may have. And it's apparently super reliable and secure, and is compliant with HIPAA, which is apparently something that is, I guess, very rare amongst these telemedicine apps.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that they're sort of one of these companies that's trying to do a lot of different things, right? They started with more of the telemedicine video call aspect, but they're also tackling continuing medical education as well. I think it's, one thing is they find that as once they get into that world and they start to really have success, they can be a very sticky platform. And so they want to help expand the uses for a given doctor. Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Okay. Any other volunteers? This one's interesting, although I'm not sure who submitted it. Touch surgery. Who did that one?
That was mine. Can you?
Okay, great. Would you like to talk about it?
Sorry, there's two of us in the same room, but yeah, it's just has different surgical procedures that you can choose from, and then students can study off of that. It's a lot more practical than trying to shadow various, surgical events, and it also minimizes all of the things needed to, participate in those procedures. So it can be used as a training tool beforehand, if you are shadowing, or it can just be used, I guess, instead of shadowing, since it'll be difficult to be able to witness so many different types of surgeries.
Great. Yeah, and I just want to highlight with this one, you could create this for your prototype. You don't obviously have to have a bunch of videos and stuff, but to create that user interface that helps someone select a video is something that's well within your reach. And you can just sort of put, I like to say you can put fake data in there, right? So it's sort of like placeholder information that you can have so that people can just get an idea for what you're building and what you're trying to accomplish. Great, thanks so much. Good example. Okay, maybe we do one more. Giovanni, would you like to go?
Yeah, so I did it on Hope Virtual. So it's a specific telehealth used by City of Hope. It's a cancer hospital out in California. And so it just basically acts as any other similar telehealth program, I guess just specific to this hospital. And it basically just eases or just allows that virtual landscape for patients to interact with like healthcare providers and other important health personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, you'll see this in about probably 4 weeks. A form like this and putting that on the internet is something that you all will be able to do. It's not that bad. And it's definitely something you can do. You can even have required fields. And then the trick will be, okay, once you submit, can we take that patient to something that's interesting, right? Maybe based on what they inputted, or maybe just as a next step. So that'll be your challenge when you're building these applications. Okay. Would anyone else like to present on their storyboards? Anyone? Okay, well, let's take a break. We'll come back at 4:14. And then we'll finish off the first lecture. Okay, let's get started again, and then we'll cruise on to wrap up the rest of this overview. So next up is payers, and then after that, oh no, sorry, producers, and then after that we'll do payers. So the first category of health IT applications for producers is operations. So here we're talking about helping them manage their clinical trials, helping them incorporate real world evidence into their development, manufacturing, so making those operations more efficient, as well as digital health applications. So what I'll go over here is something called metadata. And the problem that it is solving is that clinical trial coordination is poor. So the inputs that they take are all the clinical trial sites that are being used for a given development program, the data from those sites, as well as patient data. Then the outputs are they can help graph enrolled patients, as well as performance analysis, maybe helping the pharma company compare the different sites with each other, and really helping them analyze the progress of their clinical trial. So setting the scene, a biopharma company starts a clinical trial. They then coordinate with metadata, and the platform analyzes all of the data from their clinical trial and recommends paths forward. So after that, decisions around protocol amendments and site recruitments can be more effectively made to avoid delays. I work in the clinical trial space, and what I can tell you is that sometimes a poorly defined protocol can cause months or even over a year worth of delay on a clinical program crossing the finish line, simply because they're maybe used the wrong eligibility criteria, or they made the protocol too difficult for their sites to execute on. So this helps them fix that. And the outcome that they're looking for is more successful and quicker clinical trial completion. Next category is a category that we like to call beyond the pill. So here we're talking about digital therapies, which we've already covered a little bit, but also patient engagement, drug adherence, making sure that patients are not only taking the drug, but are also educated about what the therapy is doing for them. Here we have an app that was created by Novartis. So this was an internal program called 4Care. And the problem that they're solving is that it can sometimes be very difficult to manage your chronic illness, and just getting the diagnosis and treatment is not always enough. So the inputs that they'll take are patient info, prescription info, and health data. And then the outputs are they will help with notifications to the patient when they should be taking their drug or their next appointment is due. Maybe they need a refill. So helping remind patients of these upcoming tasks, as well as information about their disease and health resources more generally. So the storyboard is that a patient with a chronic disease might begin their treatment regimen, and then they enter all of their prescription and doctor info into 4Care. After that, 4Care will provide alerts and guidance that will help them through their treatment. You can see that on this panel on the right, not only will they help them with their treatments, but they will also help connect them with advocacy groups, maybe legal advice or legal, connecting them with legal assistance so that they can navigate all of the different challenges that might come with living with their chronic disease. The desired outcome is that patients are more adherent and also less confused during their treatment journey. Next category, diagnostics. So here we talk about digital applications that might help with behavior, as well as might connect something with a diagnostic to your mobile device. Some of you might have experienced this with COVID, right? Getting your test result delivered to you via your phone. Passive listening and using that to diagnose, as well as using Internet of Things to try to get a better diagnosis. So the application that I will highlight here is called Red's app. And the problem that it is solving is that respiratory diagnosis can't be done at home currently, at least not without the app or other similar apps. So the inputs that they will take are patient information, as well as just having the patient breathe into the microphone of their device. The outputs so that they get a respiratory diagnosis based on their breathing patterns, as well as a connection to a clinician. So it sort of can be a bridge between diagnosis and then telemedicine. Storyboard is that a patient thinks that they may have a respiratory issue and they download the app. After that, they will enter their information and breathe into a microphone. The app will then make a diagnosis and they will communicate with their clinician. The desired outcome is a more efficient way to make a respiratory diagnosis. So you don't have to go into the clinic now. Finally, drug discovery. So here we're talking the very beginning of a particular therapy life cycle. So here we're addressing things like in silico research, right? You might have heard of in vitro and vivo. Has anyone heard of in silico? Any hands? So think Silicon Valley or silicon chips. So here it's basically doing that initial drug screening on a computer. So you're not actually using petri dishes or anything. You're just trying to make that first part of the process more efficient through algorithms. R&D clouds, so helping scientists within an organization share their work with each other so that they can better collaborate. Artificial intelligence, this is being used a lot in drug development. Don't really know yet how successful that will be, but there's been a lot of interest and a lot of money going into that space lately. And then bioinformatics. So just all the data that we have, trying to do stuff with it to make sense of it, make it useful. Now, you've heard me say that probably half a dozen times now. How do we make sense of all the data that we've got? That's really a core challenge of health IT. And opportunity, I would say. Okay, so storyboard for this is a platform called Schrodinger. And the problem that it is solving is that drug discovery is siloed and inefficient. So this is for producers. The data inputs that they take are drug targets, maybe some desired drug characteristics. Let's say you're saying, you know what, I want this drug to be safe in children. Maybe this is a disease that is common in children. I also want it to have long lasting power. So I only have to maybe give a dose once a year, something like that. And then the outputs that Schrodinger will provide are lead compounds that you can then pursue in preclinical and then eventually clinical studies, as well as predictions about how those lead compounds will interact in the body. So the storyboard, and this, by the way, is an example of in silico research. So a company wants to develop a next generation drug. What happens next is that the company will input their target mechanism as well as desired properties of their hopeful drug into the system. And then the platform will return a list of top potential lead compounds that can impact the target that they're looking to go after. Desired outcome would be a more efficient and thorough lead optimization in less time. Okay. Okay, let's go through the Google form again, and if you all can try to maybe find something in R&D or digital therapeutics, something like that, or clinical trials that might be a good example of using health IT for pharma companies, producers. So we'll take 5 minutes and then we'll talk about what we found. Okay, we got a couple good ones, a few. Would anyone like to present on what they found? I'd like someone who hasn't gone yet, but I actually don't see any submissions from the people who haven't spoken yet. But that's okay. Even if you're not ready yet, one of you could maybe just shout out a name of a company and I'll bring it up.
Swiss model.
Okay. So what's it called? Swiss model?
Yeah, it's a protein, 3D protein visualization software.
Cool. All right, let's talk about it. So here it looks like it's focused on R&D. So you can see how this might be helpful within the scope of R&D. Now, this is the type of site that you actually could create on your own, right? You can imagine just finding a bunch of images off of Google Images and sort of faking the process, right? So you can have someone input something into a form. And again, you all will know how to build a form based on the first 3 or 4 lectures. And then after they submit, you could bring up a picture of a protein, right? So obviously you would not be creating that protein based on their inputs, but it could help give someone an idea of how your prototype would work, right? And also on your side, it demonstrates that you're able to take form inputs and then create some sort of output, okay? So just to show an example of something that probably took a lot of development, a lot of big data analysis, maybe even some machine learning to try to figure out how to give the right outputs. You don't have to do that part. I'm more interested in how you can create a good user interface using code. Okay. So that's actually kind of a nice example in that sense. Anyone else?
I have a question about the one. Oh, I did mine on BetterHelp. It's like the telehealth, but because I think for that one, they make you do a questionnaire in the beginning before you're assigned a therapist or like a psychologist, and kind of like match you on whatever you like answer on or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you would click get started, right? Yeah, so, groups in the past have created surveys that look very similar to this. So it's definitely something that will be, within the scope of what you need to do and what you'll be able to do. No, and I failed. Oh, that's interesting. That's kind of a cool feature. I could see one of the teams building that where you're kind of asking for the age. And if someone gives an age that's not within the range of what you're targeting, you could kick them over to a partner site. Okay. All right, well, let's move on to payers. So with payers, there's a few categories. The first is operations. So this is kind of the boring, okay, how do you manage your clients? How do you handle claims? What are we going to do about data privacy, making sure we don't get hacked? So even though that's boring, that's probably the most substantial aspect in terms of dollars that have gone into this space. And a lot of that is because it's not reinventing the wheel. This is stuff that has been done in other industries, and these are just applications within healthcare. So it's sort of an easier challenge to try to tackle. An example here is Sidecar Health. The problem that they're solving is that healthcare costs are not transparent. And the inputs that they will take are a patient's health coverage needs, as well as the costs of all the different providers that are within network. And then the outputs, they will get actually price comparison, as well as automated payments. So to make a storyboard, let's set the scene. An insurance provider wants to enable patients to price shop for different providers. Patients will then log into this platform. They will select the coverage amount as well as the input location. And then when care is needed, they will see a map of all the providers in their area, along with how much they're going to cost. So the outcome is that patients are able to lower their health costs and also feel a little bit more empowered through comparison shopping. And you can see here, for the same procedure, you have one cost $5, one cost $28. So over a 5-fold increase, only about 10 blocks away. This is very common. And the reason this is so common is because applications like Sidecar Health are still early in their development. So ideally, we could get to some place where cost comparison is so easy that will sort of lower overall healthcare costs, because people can no longer hide behind the fact that, you know what, we don't really, let's be honest, know how much most procedures that we get in our health treatment are going to cost until after it's already been charged. So this helps really increase transparency along those lines. As I was going through this, I actually saw a couple more answers pop up that on the previous module that I'd like to cover. So Jennifer, you brought up antidote. Would you be able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just I was kind of looking into it because I work at City of Hope, like in the clinical trials, and I know that's one of their main goals is just to be able to get on board as many patients as they can, because there's a lot of open studies but not a lot of patients. And so Antidote, I was reading, they kind of solve those problems by because like all the pre-screening and all, they'll be able to take care of that before actually referring them out. That was just like one example. They'll reach out to the patients, because that's another big thing is they'll go with the whole like consenting process of them coming into the hospital, and at the end, like when they actually do like the phone call, like they did all this like dirty work pretty much, and then they decide not to, because the nurses are really, really busy, and it's takes a lot of work to kind of follow up. So it seemed like they kind of take care of a lot of that hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty familiar with Antidote because, I'm in the clinical trials space. And so we've definitely worked with clients who also work with Antidote, and they help increase the amount of patients that come into a clinical study. And you can see how this interface works on the patient side. So they answer all these questions, and then once they're done with it, and you can see actually each time I was answering the questions, the amount of trials that are available to me went down until they finally got, okay, here's all the ones based on all the answers to my questions that I qualify for. And I can click on one and then see the details about the study. So pretty cool company. It actually was founded by an executive at Kayak. So anyone use Kayak, the airline search site. So I figured, hey, maybe I can use what I've used to help people find cheap flights to help them find clinical trials. So that was the origin of Antidote. Okay, and then how about Kristen? I see N-side suite. Would you be able to talk about that?
Hi, Professor. Yes, I found an app that is for providers for the previous exercise.
Oh, I thought you put producers, this end-to-end clinical trial.
Yes, for producers, sorry.
This
For
one, yeah.
producers. Yeah.
Yes,
It's
talk us through this one.
To organize the clinical trials, maybe for international clinical trials, and to keep it monitoring. Well, it's for that to save costs, to optimize the productions.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're sort of taking a holistic approach on clinical trials, and they have an eye for the global aspect of clinical trials as well. And that's definitely something that is needed because I think a lot of the times, the people who run a clinical trial, they're really good at the science part, but the coordination, the communication, they're less good at. And so having an application that helps with that is tremendously valuable. Okay, great. So moving forward, back to payers, patient engagement is a big thing now. This is actually, it didn't used to be, but now this has become a big thing with payers is they try to engage with patients within their network to help coach them and help ensure that they're engaging in healthy behaviors. And the reason they're doing this from sort of a cold, hard business perspective is they know that the healthier they can keep their patients, the less that they have to pay if their patients are to fall ill. So they've developed some digital solutions around this. A good example of a company that's really embraced this is Oscar Health. And the problem that Oscar Health is solving is that health insurance can be difficult to understand. So what they'll do is they'll take inputs. They'll take patient's health info, patient's plan info, as well as the provider network, and then they'll help output analytics on that plan, and then also communicate with the providers to help make sure that everything's being done as efficiently as possible. Now, the storyboard, let's set the stage. A patient wants a plan that is personalized for their individual needs. So after that, a concierge team affiliated with Oscar will help them to identify the providers as well as the care that are best fit for the patient, given the patient's condition and their plan. After that, the patient will use the digital app to manage their care team. And you can see that here in the middle. So they can message different elements of their care team, different people who are helping them to maximize their care. And then the ultimate outcome is that patients will choose the best care for themselves, and that leads to better outcomes. Okay, finally, data. So when we talk about data from a payer perspective, we're really talking about adjusting risk adjustment, making that as efficient as we can so that our resources are going to the people who are going to need it the most, having a data platform so that we can just see what's going on within our network at all times, cost benefit analysis of adopting or reimbursing certain treatments, and then also prevention. So how can we use our analysis of the data to prevent disease and therefore costs? So a good example here is a company called Komodo Health. And the problem that they're solving is that provider performance can sometimes be very difficult to assess. So the inputs that they will take are providers that are within the network of a given customer who would be a payer, as well as all of the claims data that are associated with that provider. And then what they'll do is they will provide analytics on provider performance. as well as patient data maps so that you can see how patients are doing across different networks, across different providers, across different regions. And then that can help you deploy your resources effectively as a payer. So as a storyboard, a payer wants to know which providers are performing the best. So what they'll do is they'll input their network into Komodo Health, and then the payer will work with all the different providers to help ensure that they're doing the right thing to ensure the best outcome. And then the desired outcome is that the payer achieves better health within their network at a lower cost. Okay, so this is the last storyboard. I'd encourage you to look, Google around one of these categories, whether that be actual, digital and health insurance, maybe some of these wellness incentives. There's some cool companies in that, or on the payer side, right? Risk adjustment, some of these enterprise softwares that can help, and then do a storyboard around that. And then we'll reconvene in 5. So 4:49, talk about a few, and then we'll move on to the final portion of this class. This one's a little bit more in the weeds. So if you've got if you're having any trouble finding anything, let me know or put in the chat, and I'll help give you some search terms.
I have a question about the wellness incentives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wouldn't it also, depending on what type you're looking at, wouldn't there be two kinds of users? Yes, there's a payer for it, but the payer in this case is going to be initially the patient or the family of the patient.
Absolutely. And it's perfectly legitimate if you've got something that is being used by patients or by the families of a patient, but it sort of fits within this category as something that ties to health insurance, then that works, right? So I think,
Yeah,
go
it's
ahead.
an insurance company. It's Blue Shield.
Perfect. Yeah, even better. That sounds like a great example.
Their target is the patient. They're trying to get clients.
Yeah. So it fits both, right? I mean, you could have put that on the patient category, but you can certainly put that on the payer category too, because it ultimately leads to lower costs. And it's something that obviously Blue Shield is trying to put out to improve their business.
Thank you.
Great question. Okay, would anyone like to present on what they submitted? Okay, Chris, what have you got for us?
So this one was in a press release. It doesn't actually exist yet, but it's Athena Health is unveiling. They're kind of doing like a holistic patient experience app where every single patient interaction is consolidated into one app, and they're integrating like the health records and doctor communication and like I guess like literally everything into trying to fit into this app.
That's interesting. So it looks like, is this Athena Health plans to release a bunch of new products this year, and a new patient-facing app focused on engagement and care management. Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think they're getting at here? What do you think, sort of as a company, their goal is?
I think so they can direct patients to their network and just improve the customer experience so that they get more customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And Athena Health is they're a big company. They're one of the big ones, and so to see that they're investing in something like this, I think is really indicative of why this is important. It's almost like these patient-facing apps. I think the payers have more of a vested interest in making these work than anyone else, because they want to understand, why are our patients unhealthy and how can we change that?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? We got some good ones. Mary?
Well, at first I was looking at incentive programs, and then I realized from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then as I scrolled down, I realized it's both wellness incentive and health coaching combined, which I thought was super cool. It's a virtual portal. Yeah, that one. It's a virtual portal where you can sign up to have a healthcare coach online, and they give you an incentive. They give you like $40 back a return when you sign up. So that's essentially, you're pretty much getting your application fee refunded to you right now. And then what's really cool is, based off of your goals you make, if once you make your checkpoints with your healthcare coach, you're going to get additional bonuses throughout the year.
Yeah. It's funny. It's kind of like a different side of the coin, right? It's these companies make so much money off of healthcare, so much that it's almost a little bit sleazy, right? How much money is made in profit off of healthcare. But the flip side of that is that they're actually losing a lot of money, or at least less of an opportunity to make money when they have an inefficiency in their relationship with patients. Maybe they're not providing coaches or things like that. And so I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that, and because of that, you're seeing, like with Athena Health, all of this suite of apps that they're producing, and you're seeing Blue Cross Blue Shield that is really paying you, right? Because it's worth it to them. I've seen some insurance companies give people Apple Watches, things like that, because it's worth it to them. And these are things that to us, it's like, wow, that's good. That's a lot of money, or that's an expensive toy that you're giving me, right? But it's worth it to them if they can tie it to better health outcomes. And I think we're kind of just starting to get to the point where it's not just shooting in the dark. I think we're starting to understand how we can use digital tools to spend this money on our patient network and actually have that result and improved outcomes. So it's funny, even though payers is like the most in the weeds, no one really wants to talk about it. It has some of the most exciting stuff and when going on in digital health. And when you look at what those things are, they're actually super interesting, right? These wellness programs and trying to figure out, okay, well, if I give someone an Apple Watch, is that going to pay off? So there's a lot of cool things going on in this space. Anyone else? Or Kevin or Lynn or Morgan or Sophia?
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm on my phone today, so I don't have access to show you a screen necessarily. But one that came to my mind was an app that we used I worked at AbbVie over the summer, and an app that they used was for their patient support program. So it gave patients, access to 24-hour nurse support through that app, and it also allowed them to put their insurance information in, and it, in most cases, if they didn't have like a Medicare or Medicaid program, they were able to get a COPE card through that app that got their prescription down to like $10 a month by showing that copay card on their app to, say like a CVS or a Walgreens. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of resources out there that have been provided by some of these companies or even the government, and patients just don't know always how to take advantage of those programs. And so to be able to put that in an app or put that in their phone can be tremendously helpful to get people to actually use these services that are available to them. All right, anyone else? All right, moving forward. So reading for this week is Lean Startup. Has anyone read or heard of Lean Startup before? It's a really great book. I would recommend reading the whole thing, but for this class, there's only so much we can read. So I'm just going to have you read one chapter, and it's chapter 6, where they talk about MVPs. So I alluded to MVPs at the beginning of the lecture. Anyone remember what MVP stands for? It's not most valuable player.
Minimum value product or viable
Very
product.
close. Yes, minimum viable product. Okay, so minimum means what is the least amount of work that we need to do. Viable, what is the least amount of work that we need to do to make something viable, right? And then product. So that we're talking about, in this case, a digital product. So it's oftentimes, if we have an idea, we want to kind of boil the ocean, and we want the idea to do everything for everyone. And the idea of the MVP is it helps us sort of get past that inclination to want to do everything, and says, well, what's the one thing that you really need to do? And we're going to learn through this reading what that looks like. And you'll actually find out that in some cases, it's not even a product. Sometimes it's just having a good presentation. It's anything that you can take to your target users. And ideally, we take a product to our target users, but there have been examples, and you'll see this in the reading, where someone just took a video or a presentation to users just to see, hey, are you all going to be interested in this? And if so, what's the part that's most interesting to you? And that putting your idea or your product in front of users is the core element of what Lean Startup is. And it's sort of become beyond a book. It's become almost a culture within the startup world. It's, create a minimum product and put that out there into the wild and see what happens. I think you'll find very few investors, very few entrepreneurs who will say, you know what, the best thing is to like build the perfect product, with the right team. And then just once you built it, then put it out there. because what you'll find if you spent that much work and that much time on it without having it interact with customers is you've built the wrong thing or for the wrong person, something like that. So the idea here is, how can I very quickly get something out there to users, to customers, whoever they might be, so that they can tell me how to make it better. So we'll ask some of these questions of like, well, why would we release an imperfect product? I got at that a little bit, but we'll delve into that a little bit more next week. And then I also want to hear some of your ideas of what would make a good MVP. I've never used Canvas before. I assume you all are experts on it at this point. But has anyone had a chance to look at the assignments? Does everything look fine? Okay, great. So you have what you need. If you don't, just let me know, and I'll figure out a better way to either email it to you all or post an announcement with a link. But I uploaded chapter 6 into Canvas, so you should be good to go. Okay, another thing that I want you all to do is create a free account on Codecademy. So I'll just show you, since we do have some time, because I actually, this year, I skipped the having everyone introduce themselves because this is a bigger class, and I had you all just do it through the form. So we've got some time. This is Codecademy, so it's codecademy.com. I'll just paste it in the chat so you'll have it. Okay, you can join with just an email and a password. It's totally free. If you want to do some of the higher level languages, you have to start paying, but everything that I'm assigning you for this this particular lecture or this particular class, sorry, is within the scope of what's free. I'll just show you what it looks like. So if I go to the Learn HTML, I can learn, oops, find HTML. I can go into the course, and then you'll see I've already started, so I can sort of join midway. And then it'll give me a little reading, and then it'll ask me to start doing stuff. And so if I want to add that, I will just add it into the document. It'll tell me why I'm doing that. And then I can run the code, and then I'll say, okay, cool, you did it right. So that's the most easy thing, right? I just copied and pasted something from here to here and then clicked run. But it'll start to get a little bit more complicated. It'll say like, oh, I want you to build a form that does this, that, and the other. And then you'll have to do it. And it'll give you hints if you feel stuck. And then of course, if you are stuck even after getting the hints, I'm available, happy to help with any questions that you might have. Once you complete it, your assignment, you'll go into your profile, and then it'll show what you've completed. So in my case, I've completed a bunch of stuff. So what I want you to do is just send me a link to your achievements, put that into your Canvas assignment, and then I'll just make sure that everyone's completed the right badges in the right time before lecture. Okay. Any questions about how that works? Great. So here's some instructions in the slides of how to do that, but I showed you the live version of how to do that. And then the last thing that I want to talk about a little bit is balsamic. So balsamic is the they call it wireframing. This is what you're going to be doing for your midterm. That'll be due in a couple weeks. And it's basically like a PowerPoint for web developers, right? So, oops. So here's an example of a project. This is actually a project from last year. And you can see, and I'll go through this more next week, but you can just sort of drag and drop everything. And if you want to have, let's say, a drop down, you just put that wherever you want it within your app. But it looks a lot like PowerPoint looks. The difference is just that it's made for coders. And you notice that it looks a little basic, right? So it's just sort of black and white, looks hand drawn. That's on purpose. And the reason they do it like this is because they want to emphasize that when you're doing a mock-up, you're not trying to create the perfect version of this. You're just trying to create the basic concept. And then you'll improve upon it as you start to develop it further. But it wants you to sort of get down to just the brass tacks, the very basic aspects of building a mock-up, and then focus on that alone. So don't worry about colors, none of that stuff. Just build an app that has functions. And they give you all sorts of little buttons and containers, forms, icons, what have you, to help you make your mock-up, okay? And then what we'll actually end up doing when you present to the class is we'll have assessments. So we'll all assess each other, peer assessments. And then the ones that get the most positive assessments, that might lead to a better grade, but I'll really be determining your grade. The best peer assessments will lead to which wireframes end up getting used for prototype projects, right? So we'll pick the 5 or 6 wireframes that seem to be the most desired by your peers, and then we'll form teams around those, and then those will turn into actual code projects. Any questions about that? Another question. So I have all of your KGI emails. I need an email that you use with Google Drive, because Balsamic, you can see it's run through Google Drive. Yes,
no,
Mary?
To Google. We have Google Drives with our student emails.
Okay, so everybody's student email will work then. If that's the case, great. What I will do is I will submit those emails to Balsamic Corporate, and then they will make sure that you all are part of the free account, sort of the free educational account. And then that will enable you to use it. Okay, any questions? Anyone concerned after hearing this lecture? You're like, oh, this is not actually what I wanted, or not what I was looking to get into. Because we could, I want to develop this with you all. We've done it 3 years, but I think, it's been successful when I've listened to the students about what do you need to have a good KGI experience? What do you need to learn? What skills do you need in your tool belt? I got a little bit of that through what you submitted at the beginning of the lecture, but if we have any discussions that we want to have, right? Right now, Mary has suggested that we have a little bit of more focus on UIs within medical devices. So I think that's a great thing to have within the lectures. We have a little bit of that. I'll probably be expanding that even more for you all. But if anyone has any other things, I know a lot of you want to learn coding. We've got that taken care of, right? That's in the bag, so to speak. Anything else though?
I do have a question.
Sure.
Maybe potentially going over how the transition into like a tech industry could look like. especially like if we have no prior experience and like we're like learning to code for like the first time, starting our own projects and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you talking about from a individual career perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's in my wheelhouse because it's something that I had to do, right? I went from pharmaceutical operations, which really has nothing to do with this stuff, to health IT because it's something that I felt was going to be very important for the future of the industry. And, some parts were difficult, I'm not going to lie. But my biggest takeaway from it is that you definitely don't need to learn CS, computer science in undergrad or even grad school. In fact, I'm not so sure that you should. I think it's better to have a fundamental education in something more real, right? Something like healthcare, some other sort of business or industry, and then gain the skills to be able to use coding to your advantage. I think that the direction that you all are heading, if you want to get into coding, is better than being sort of a trained coder from the start who doesn't really know as much outside of that world. Okay, any other questions? All right, well, I'll let you all go a little bit early then. I'm available in the intervening week in case anyone has any questions. Oh, I guess one more housekeeping. I put it in Canvas, but I do want to emphasize office hours. So those are, I put a link to this in Canvas, but it's basically just a document. I will see if anyone edits the document. So they'll give me a notification so that I can see if someone's signed up. Try to give a little bit of advanced warning if you're going to sign up, just so that I sort of know that I need to sign on to Zoom, right? But basically just put your name in one of these slots. If you're going to need multiple slots, feel free to take a couple. Try not to take more than 2 though, because other people might need the time too. And then the link to office hours will be this one. So you can just find me on Zoom, same link. All right, class dismissed. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Can I ask a question about HTML?
Yes, absolutely.
How can